Bill Peterson was the senior curator at the Mystic Seaport. In 2007, he was appointed the Carl C. Cutler Curator of American Maritime History and Art at the museum. He's now the Curator Emeritus at Mystic Seaport. He graduated with a BA in History from Eastern Connecticut State University. He's lectured and written extensively about the Connecticut maritime experience. His book, which is for sale here, at least the later edition, Mystic Built Ships and Shipyards of the Mystic River, Connecticut, 1784 to 1919, received the John Lyman Award in 1990 for, quote, the best book published in American maritime history, presented by the North American Society of Oceanic Historians. He also co-authored the Historic Buildings at Mystic Seaport Museum, which received an Award of Merit from the League of Connecticut Historical Organizations. And in addition, he was the historical advisor and contributing writer for CPTV's collaborative documentary, Connecticut in the Sea, which received the Connecticut Humanity Council's Wilbur Cross Award in 2000. So I think we've got a very eminent speaker tonight. Without any further ado, Bill Peterson.
I don't know, I'm hooked up, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, the very first time I gave a talk here was probably one of the first lectures that we gave years and years ago. And I was so nervous at the point it was going like this.
It's okay.
But now, all these years later, I had a stroke a few years back and a new knee not so many years, a couple of years ago. And so if my thing goes like this, and now you know why. So I apologize if I slur my words a little bit or jump around, whatever. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. So anyway, this is a map that's in the book. This is the earliest known view of the Mystic area from around 1836, I think, or thereabouts, from Barber's Historical Collections. And of course, this is a later bird's eye view of Mystic. One thing right to point out is right here. It looks like this now, thanks to that fire. All that's left from the fire that caused this thing was, this was the Mystic Iron Works. It went all the way from here to here. And there was well, I'll have a picture of it later and we'll talk about it then. All that was left is a chimney from that fire, which was in 1875, 75. And it was the cause for the first fire company to be formed permanently in Mystic, the B.F. Hoxie Engine Company, which I am a very happy life member of. But later on it was a shipyard, and Hill and Grinnell, Irons and Grinnell, Hill and Grinnell, and then the Pendleton brothers, and I'll talk a little bit about them in a little bit. So there are some shipyard sites. This is the biggest one, of course, and then across the river over here was Eldridge Packer's shipyard, and later on it was D.O. Richmond's boatyard. And right here was the location of the Gilbert Transportation Company later on, right after the turn of the 20th century. In my opening remarks, I should say I'm very indebted to a number of people, one of which is sitting next to me, my wife Claire, who I think was going to kill me last night because she was trying to put this together in a different way, but anyway. And also Andy German, who was the, I don't know, is Andy here by any chance? Well, he should be, on the book he was by the editor, and not only an editor, but a good friend, and it contributed quite a bit to this book, and I am very indebted to him. Great editor, great knowledge of maritime history, and it's a much better book because of him. And also Jim Giblin, who's a former trustee at the seaport, and he directed the shipyard at the seaport for a while and became a good friend. And he was a great encouragement to me in getting this book done again. And I think he pushed it quite a bit to the powers that be at Mystic Seaport. And so I thank him. Oh, well, of course, yeah, I don't want to mention everybody, and it's already in the acknowledgments. Carol Kimball, of course, was a great inspiration. She served with me on the first board of the Historical Society, along with Joyce Everett, and we all met in Joyce's parlor for the first year, along with a few other people, Lynn Langlois and Betty Wheeler, Barbara Jensen. Oh my gosh, I can't remember all of them. I won't say it doesn't matter, but I was there, I guess, is the best thing I can say. All right, this is a picture of where I spoke in Noank at this building here. Oh, shoot.
It's me.
Right here. No.
You want to talk about
Yeah, it's a Latham store. And up here, you can't really see it very well, but it's a carving by the Mystic Ship carvers, Colby and Campbell, or Campbell and Colby, actually. Okay, next. Well, this is the earliest photograph ever taken, I think, in Mystic. And these buildings are still there, thank goodness. They're close to where the fire was over here. This is the original Cottrell building right there. And of course, these buildings are still there too. And I think this one as well. But anyway, what's interesting about this is it's a daguerreotype that was given to me by Mayburn Coss, who was the last resident in the Mallory house. Then she passed away, and I had done some work for her, and the only thing I really wanted was this daguerreotype that I had seen. And it turns out it's the earliest view in Mystic, and it's the only view that I know of a whaler that sailed out of Mystic, and I believe I'm pretty sure it's the bark Leander. And you can read all about it in the book. Next. What I wanted to point out, if you're interested in what was inspiration for the shipbuilding in Mystic, the early shipbuilding, and later on a little bit, was the West Indies trade, which this represents. But I also want to point out that the fisheries were also a very important component of the early shipbuilding in Mystic. And then the cotton trade after that was next on the list of important reasons for some of the larger ships being built at Mystic. After that, of course, the Civil War had an important influence as well. Okay, next. One of the earliest shipbuilders in Mystic, at all Mystic actually, was Silas Greenman. Burroughs, rather, I'm sorry. Silas Burroughs, thank you. He had a shipyard in an old Mystic, the head of the river it was called at that time, and along with the Leeds brothers. There were two shipyards up there, Leeds and Burroughs Yard. And they built some of the very earliest vessels that were built on the Mystic River. Next. This austere gentleman, Charles Mallory.
Love that.
Yeah. He was a sailmaker. He learned his trade in New London at the sail loft of his brother-in-law, Nathan Beebe, I believe it was. And then he went out on his own as a sailmaker, and he was on his way to Boston. He was on his way to Boston on his foot, walking to Boston with his sailmaking gear. He got as far as Mystic. Well, he saw some young boys playing ball on a field, and asked if there was any work in Mystic, and they said, "Oh yeah, there's a lot of work for a sailmaker." And so he ended up getting some work on some of the fishing vessels and other vessels that were in the harbor at the time, and the rest is history. He kept getting jobs in sailmaking, and one job led to another, and he amassed quite a bit of money doing it. Money making in sailmaking, he reinvested in shipping and made a boatload of money. Well, and later on, he invested in whaling. In fact, the Leander, I think, is the reason that the Leander survived, was because it was in his house. And I think it was one of his first vessels that he owned with Joseph Cottrell. And that's, I think, why it was at Cottrell's Wharf. Whaling, shipping, and then shipbuilding. And his sons all were involved in all that stuff. Most of them, well, I think I might have a picture of them later on. Charles Henry Mallory was the one that really amassed a fortune in the coastal trade, New York to Texas. Okay, next. This is one of the larger vessels built at the Mallory Yard. This is after the Civil War, but it's very typical of some of the wooden vessels that he constructed during the Civil War. It's the Carondelet, I think, in 1874. Next. The steamer Ella was actually built during the Civil War and used during the Civil War to carry troops down to the various theaters of war during the Civil War. And here she is tied up at one of the wharfs up in Norwich. Next.
Was she built by the Mallory?
Yeah, she was built by the Mallorys. I thought I said that, but anyway. This is the Greenman Yard right here. There were two slipways that were there. And actually, I think there was actually a third one here for a while during the war. And they were originally started work up in Old Mystic for doing work for Leeds and Burroughs, and then they got a shipyard down where Elm Grove Cemetery is right now, and they built a large vessel there called the John Baring, and then they bought this property down where it is now, Greenmanville, and they built all their houses here. And some of their workers are here, built houses, and some of these were boarding houses for the shipyard workers.
Is that the seaport now?
Yes, that's the seaport now. Okay, next. This is an advertisement that was in one of the New London papers. It's the type of, they built a number of vessels, not a small number, a lot of vessels built by Greenman, the brothers at Mystic for people in New London and Norwich, and of course Mystic and Noank and even Stonington. Okay, next. This is one of the larger ships built at the Greenman Yard. This is after the Civil War, but again, very typical of the large vessels that were built during the period before the Civil War, and clipper ships and vessels of that ilk. Right here, you really can't see it very well, but it's one of the Mystic round stern vessels that were developed. It made the Mystic vessels very distinctive wherever they went, rather than the more common transom sterns.
What kind of ship is that for a freighter?
Well, no, it was a ship, but later on, I think it was converted to a bark. And here was the frame for a mold loft that was burned down just before this vessel was launched. Actually, it's was replacing one that was burned before. I think it was an incendiary fire because some of the workers, quite frankly, were not happy with the fact that they had a sawmill installed because it took away the job of the sawyers. And I have a funny feeling that that's what happened. Anyway, next. This is the patriarch. This is George Greenman. He and his brother Thomas and Clark Greenman were the three principals in George Greenman Company. They all were handsome devils, I guess. I don't guess, because we have all three portraits, and they're all pretty much by the same artist, guy by the name of Bixby. Okay. This is him in older age. Next. Here's the ship Frolic, one of their later ships, tied up at the Mallory Wharf, as it turns out. And these vessels here were all gunboats that were destined for the Spanish government. And there was a legal case brought against them leaving the river because some of the governments in Central and South America were afraid they were going to be used against these countries trying to gain their independence from Spain at the time. So there was an issue of the Monroe Doctrine being brought into, and so President Grant put a revenue cutter stationed off of the mouth of the river and prevented these from being sold to the Spanish government. But they eventually were. The Supreme Court eventually released them. And so some of them did go to the Spanish government and were used in Cuba primarily. So it was some of them were actually blown out of the water during the Spanish-American War later on. Okay, Claire, next. This is William Ellery Maxon. He was, along with Nathan Gallup Fish, they owned the Maxon and Fish Shipyard in West Mystic, where a number of large vessels were built, and one of the prominent yards. Okay, next. One of the more famous ones was this vessel. This is the gunboat Galena, built during the Civil War. She was one of the first three ironclads built by the government. They had three different varieties that were built. This was more of a conventional type. I mean, it did have iron plating on its side, but it was made more for ship-to-ship combat rather than what she ended up doing. So the other two were a vessel called the New Ironsides, which was just that. It was all iron, made up of all iron. And then the third one, of course, was the Monitor. And so we know all about the Monitor, I guess.
The Monitor was built in Mystic?
No. She was built in New York, but the New Ironsides, I think, was built in Philadelphia. But this contract did come to Mystic. She wasn't a very good ironclad, as it turns out, but as I say, she was built for ship-to-ship kind of combat. And on the James River, she was sent down to lead a flotilla. They were trying to go up the river during the McClellan's Peninsula campaign, and they were stopped at Drury's Bluff, and there was a fortification on the top of Drury's Bluff, and the cannons were aimed at they were, what do they want to call it, enfilade fire instead of what she was designed for, and she got blasted apart or pierced many times by the guns up on Drury's Bluff. So she didn't make it up the James River like they were hoping she would, but she did later host Abraham Lincoln when he came down to consult with General McClellan. And she was later converted to just a wooden gunboat and took place in the Battle of Mobile Bay, where she did help a vessel get past the forts at Mobile Bay. So anyway, that's the Galena. Yeah, not yet.
Okay.
Next. So Mystic, here's a Mystic River banknote, which of course touts the shipbuilding activity and on the river. Next. And there are all kinds of ancillary trades that also grew up or came to fruition during the time of the major shipbuilding influence, including this is, pump and block manufacturers and ship plumbers. Next. Yeah, here's Mystic with this is the last of the wooden drawbridges, and actually it had a sign on it that said, "Trot not on this bridge." When the next bridge was built, the next iron bridge was built, that's the one that said, "Walk your horses." And you can see way off in the distance is the Mystic Academy building. Here's the flagpole that was originally put up during the Civil War, during the heyday of the Civil War, as a sign of the town's patriotism. And of course, the Central Hall block, known as the Packer Allen building, had the stores were here and the offices were here, and big hall on the top floor. It ended up burning down. And then there was another building called Central Hall built in its place, and it burned down in, I think, 1885. And all that was left was this bottom floor that many of us may remember a long time ago. And of course, eventually it too caught fire.
Do you want to tell them about the flagpole and why it was moved?
Yeah, here's the flagpole was moved across the river because of Thomas Williams. Captain Thomas Williams was a big Democrat, and whenever the Republicans won an election, the Republicans wanted to raise the American flag on the flagpole. And because Thomas Williams wasn't happy about that, and so it caused such a fury and fuss. Because one time, Thomas Williams actually climbed up to here and cut the halyards. And so they moved it across the river to the corner of East Main and Cottrell Street, where it was for quite a few years, and then that corner burned down, and then it singed the pole. And so then they moved it again to where it is today, in case anybody's interested in that. Okay, next. Okay, here's I couldn't remember the name when I was down in Noank, but it's the Bark George Moon. And it's tied up at Steamboat Wharf. And here's the Central Hall in its new configuration behind it. And you can see a little bit of the bridge behind it. Doesn't matter. So anyway, next. This is later on, towards the end of the 19th century, when this was a vessel, I think it wasn't built in Mystic, I don't believe. Well, maybe it was. I don't know the name of it now, because I never could make it out. But a lot of vessels were coastal cargo schooners were built in Mystic in the late 19th and early 20th century to carry bulk cargoes like coal and timber, grain, any kind of bulk cargo that was, didn't have to be at one place at a specific time.
Is that a Richmond yard?
I don't remember. No, yeah, it's about where the Richmond yard later was, yeah. Okay, next. We don't have very many pictures of the shipbuilders themselves, which is too bad because they still remain kind of shadowy figures nobody talks much about the guys that actually did the work, which is a shame. But here they are, they're installing looks like the inner ceiling of one of the schooners. I think it might be the Jenny Dubois down at West Mystic. And they're also putting in the keelsons. Next. Here's the Jenny Dubois, the largest sailing vessel built in Mystic, West Mystic, at the Holmes Shipbuilding Company. And there were loads of people there taking pictures, including George Tingley, as it turns out, one of Mystic's famous photographers, who I remember as a very young man when I lived on Edgecombe Street in Mystic, because he lived down in his house on the corner of, well, where the corner is of Edgecombe Street. And every once in a while he'd be walking up the street to visit a friend of his up on Pequot Avenue. And I can remember him always wearing a dark suit and a dark hat. And if only I had known who he was at the time and had an interest at the same that I did later on, I would have tried to talk to him, but he didn't know me. He was just a little kid on the street, you know. Anyway, so next. Here's another one of the coasting schooners built at the Pendleton Shipyard, I believe it is. The Catherine Monahan. Not named after a girl I knew that worked at the seaport, but anyway, next. Okay, this is the Elvira Ball. She was the smallest 5-masted schooner built on the East Coast. And this is the Gilbert Shipyard, right near the bridge. You can sort of make out a little bit of the second iron bridge in the background here. Next. Well, the Elvira Ball and then the other ships that were in the Pendleton Yard were sort of the last of the big ships built at Mystic. And they were hoping for a renaissance of shipbuilding in Mystic at the time, so everybody came to these later launches because it was hopefully like they were trying to, Mystic and Gaylor Array, trying to pray for a renaissance of the great days of shipbuilding in Mystic. It wasn't to be though, so next. You can see the number of vessels that were, here again is the Pendleton Yard, I think it was. These are all vessels built in frame. Next. This is the Charles Wilbur. No relation to John Wilbur, he tells me. Next. David Oscar Richmond. He was a very prolific boat builder. He did build a few larger vessels in Mystic, the site of the old Packer Yard. Next. D.O. Richmond, boat builder. He built all kinds of boats. You can see in this early advertisement, he was advertising even whaleboats. Yeah. And all kinds of rowboats and catboats later on were a big thing that he specialized in. He also built sponge boats for the sponge fishery down in Florida and lifeboats for the life-saving service. You name it. If it's a small vessel, he built it. And he was very famous in his day because he was a partner with Charles Henry Mallory in the boat building business. Next. Here's one of the vessels that he built. This is the Millie. It was obviously it's going to be a sloop yacht of some kind built for a fellow in Rhode Island. Next. Here it is again. It's up on the waves, ready to ready to launch in a few days, I guess. He hired nothing but the best workmen that he could find in Mystic at the time, whether ship carpenters, boat builders, and whatever. Okay, next. Here he is in his older age on board of one of the vessels that he built. Two of the workers that he hired, you can see they're genuine boat builders. Next. Here's one of the vessels that he built, the Annie, that maybe some of you know from Mystic Seaport. This is not Race Rock. This is down at the other end of the sound, I believe, actually. Next. This is a boat that was built for, I think, the fellow that's standing here with the hat. His name was Lucius Guernsey. And he was the editor of the Mystic Press. So the boat that he had made was called the Press Yacht. And there's kind of a funny story. It's in the book of when he was trying to take off one time to go for a sail, and the boom, he knocked his hat in the water, and all the kids on shore that were watching him were laughing at him. And he talks about it, and when you get a copy of the book, you can read about it. But behind him is the area where, well, I remember it as Wally's Gulf, but it was later on, it was a Brown's ship stable area. That's where he tied up his boat. Next. One of the very early Menhaden steamers built in Mystic was the Annie L. Wilcox, and a very distinctive style of vessel in the Menhaden fishery, which was a very important fishery in Mystic, particularly after shipbuilding declined. There were fish factories on Latimer Point, Mason's Island, all up and down the coast. And off of Avery Point, the Quinnipiac fertilizer factory. And so a number of steamers were built in Mystic for that fishery.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Well, it's Menhaden that you catch. Okay, next.
Very good.
Okay, not to be forgotten, I wanted to include a woman, certainly, in the presentation. This is Adeline Gallup, who married Levi Watrous, who was a shipbuilder. She later taught at Mystic Academy, and I'm trying to remember, Levi, he actually went west at one point to build steamboats on the Ohio River. And then he went out further west and became a rancher. But I guess it didn't suit him very well, so he decided to come back to Mystic. And that's where he met Adeline, and I guess she put up with him. And so anyway, yeah, he was a very skilled ship joiner. Next. Franklin Post and Son. This is a new chapter in the new book that I added, because all of their vessels were wooden vessels, and instead of just taking it up to the end of World War I decided these guys deserved to be included in any book on wooden boat building, wooden ship and boat building. Next. And here are some of the workers. In fact, this is Franklin Post here. This is his son, Ernie. And I don't know all the names of all these guys, except that I know that this was Bill Lamb. He was one of their first workers hired by the yard, and it kept a lot of people employed during the Depression, that's for sure. they built best vessels for rum runners and for the Coast Guard. And on top of that, they repaired a number of vessels for both. One vessel that the Coast Guard captured was refitted here, and I forget it was given a number by the Coast Guard, and it ended up being a rum chaser itself. So anyway, most of these guys were very skilled boat builders. Next. Another, I mentioned the Mystic Iron Works. Well, here are some of the vessels built during the Civil War. One was the Escort, and I can't remember, this might be the Eller, I can't remember. But here are the shear legs they used to hoist in the boiler and in the engines into the vessels. And you can see on the other side of the wharf is another steamer that's already been the engines and boilers have already been put in. Next. Oh, it was Ulysses, I see, yeah. This is, I think, the A.J. Ingersoll here, and there are a whole bunch of photographs. These are the vessels that were built during the war. Not very handsome, but they did a lot of yeoman work during the war, carrying supplies and troops, again, down to the different theaters of war during the Civil War. And did a lot of work. Some of them did do work converted to gunboats too.
You wanna
Next.
Talk about the little mountain behind there.
Oh yeah, Claire reminds me. This is over this granite hill was on Mason's Island, and it was quarried away later on in the 19th century to make breakwaters, Stonington and Newport and a bunch of other places later on in the 19th century. Here's one of the engines that were built by the Mystic Iron Works, just to show you the complexity of the work that was done there. Next. Later on, of course, there was a Lathrop Engine Company. They built not steam engines, but gas engines, mostly for fishing vessels and other waterborne vessels around the turn of the century.
Where is that? Where is it?
Well, the Lathrop Company is still, the buildings are still there. Where, what's the name of the brewery there? Shoot, doesn't matter, I guess. The engine room, exactly. This was the beginning of it all. But later on, it was a brick building. I understand one of their engines is still being used up in Alaska somewhere. And then there were the block and pump makers, spar makers, so I say sail makers, and ship carvers, all the ancillary trades that went on with building ships anywhere. And that's why I think Mixed Mystic is so interesting, because it's like a microcosm of shipbuilding in the 19th century in the United States. Next. Now, one of the ship carvers. Yeah. Let me have a drink of water. Guy named Fenner became too injured to work as a shipbuilder, so he started what was known as the Cradle Factory down in West Mystic again, where he built folding doll beds and cribs. And I think we have one or two that might be in the collection here at Mystic River and also at Mystic Seaport. And so then he decided he would use the folding pattern to make a folding boat, which is an example here. And it may be the one example that still exists at Mystic Seaport that was owned by photographer Everett Schofield. Yeah, so I think the only one that still exists is at the seaport.
Campus?
It's canvas, yes, but it was waterproofed. It was supposed to be able to fold up into the size of what they called a Saratoga trunk, which you could lug into the forest if you wanted to and go fishing in a pond or wherever. I don't know how many they ever sold, but seems a little impractical. But and that's Cottrell Street in the background. Next. So later in the 19th century and early 20th century, power launches were a big rage, not only in Mystic, but all over the East Coast. This is an example. It wasn't built in Mystic, although a number of them were. A little naphtha launch called the Ida. Some of them were steam powered, some of them were gas. And like as I could say, naphtha was another, if you wanted to put your life in your hands. But anyway, they were very popular. And I think the newspaper at one time mentioned there was a lot of huffing and puffing on the river at one point, they called it. Okay, next. This is a partial view of the Palmer Shipyard in Noank. And again, it folds, and you can see it in the book. The whole thing is there. But when shipbuilding declined in Mystic, a lot of the shipbuilders shipbuilders were able to find employment down at the Palmer Yard. Next. That's the other side. Okay, you can see the extent of it and the timber that was there being brought in by schooner and by railroad and all kinds of, those were the main ways that all this timber came in. From down south, it was yellow pine and live oak were the two prominent types of timber from down south. Of course, it was white oak up here in the north, but anyway, next. This is a yacht called the Mohegan under construction at the Palmer Yard. And down here, you can't really make it out much, but that was going to be end up as a tugboat called the T.A. Scott, built for Thomas A. Scott in New London. And then in the background here, if you can make it out, is a dump scow. It was designed by the Palmers. They held the patent on it, and you could load it full of rock, and you could bring it over where you wanted to dump it, like for a breakwater or whatever, and you'd trip it, and it would open up, and all the rock would just dump right there where you wanted it. And there were quite a number of them built. So it was a very busy shipyard. Next. Here's one of the vessels that was under construction. This one, I think, actually, after it was the Palmer family, father and son, passed away, the yard was purchased by maybe go to next one. Yeah, here we go. Next by the Groton Iron Works as an ancillary yard to their main yard on the Thames River. This was during the First World War. These weren't iron vessels, these were wooden vessels, you can see. And what I find kind of fascinating is being, if there's a vessel in frame here and another one that's going to be started over here, but you can see the platform, the framing platform, is being held up here by kegs. Barrels, I guess yeah. If you want to know more about this particular vessel, you can talk to John Wilbur, because I think he knows more about it than I do. It might be the Balstow, but I'm not sure. Next. Oh, here's this is the steamer Rhode Island at the Palmer Yard when it was still to the Palmers. And here again, you can see the yard was littered with all kinds of timber. And right here in the middle, you can't really make it out very well, but it's a little sloop called the Billow that was purchased by the Palmers as just a utility yard boat for their use for, you know, whatever they needed to use it for. Okay, next.
That's the Palmer Shipyard?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was the Palmer. Yeah, and here's a little more close-up of it. The billow, you can make it out. Can you go back, Claire? Oh,
Maybe not.
I can't see it.
There we go.
oh, there we go.
Where was that located?
Yeah, you can see the framing here, the hog frames they call it. They were being installed. And the paddle boxes here.
He wants to know where it was located.
Well, it's at the Palmer Yard
Where was that?
in Noank.
Knowing
Yeah, I'm sorry.
about where,
Well, it's about where the yard is now. I mean, yeah. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on that, I guess. Okay, next. Next. This is the Palmer Yard again. You can see how busy they were in the timber that they brought in almost daily, if not weekly. Okay. Okay, this is where I thought I was going to get in trouble in Noank. But this is a typical, I call it for now, a Noank sloop. But actually, it's very similar to the MSC Berry. It's at Mystic Seaport now. Very, very similar. And very common, because it wasn't just built, they weren't just built in Noank. There were some built in Mystic and Stonington, New London, and I think a lot of them were built in Waterford, as it turns out. They were known at the time as Connecticut sloops, and that was the name I prefer to call them rather than Noank sloops. The fact that the MSC Berry is at Noank and was built in Noank and is very famous, obviously, is one of the the reasons they got the name Noank sloop. But I hope I don't offend any Noankers, but that's nevertheless, okay. Okay, this is a little steam launch earlier than the other ones. This is a little launch called the Maggie that was actually built by R.A. Morgan and Company in Noank.
And where is that taken?
Well, it's taken in the Mystic River.
No, but is that the stack from the?
That's the stack from this, yeah, that was the same stack from that fire that burned down the Mystic Iron Works.
Mason's Island.
Yeah, and then here's Mason's Island in the background. You can see that's the hill that was quarried away. And but the vessel itself was actually built by the R.A. Morgan and Company that specializes in small steam engines down in Noank, even though this is up in Mystic. And I think they're taking a party of people to the peace meeting that was held every summer in Mystic. Okay. There we go. Thank you very much for Mystic Day. Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, feel free.
Take that from me.
How long would it take to build the larger ship, and did they work year-round?
Well, it's not an easy question to answer. Sometimes I actually outline one of the brigs that were built by Maxon and Fish, because he outlines exactly when he decided to do it and when it was finally finished. And you can, but sometimes it took up to a year, but on the other times it only took a couple of months to build some of these larger vessels. So they were very skilled at what they did.
Bill, you and Claire may remember that Pam and I had that old gamble roof place up on Lambtown Road in what they erroneously call Quakertown. It's really a Rogerine enclave.
Right.
And two of the central families there were the Lambs and the Wattresses. I always assumed those were just farmer people, but here we see them down building boats in Mystic with Do you know anything about the Watchers or the Lambs being part of this scene that you're?
Well, not really. I can't answer that, except they're both very common names in the
Yeah,
Mystic and Stonington area. So,
all right, thanks.
Yeah, Bill.
yeah.
I'm from Pocketuck area, the Greenland Shipyard on Pocketuck River.
Right. Yeah, there are. I don't think there is a book called Pawcatuck River. The question was, okay, you didn't hear it, was there was a Greenman yacht on the Pawcatuck River, and that was the fourth brother, who actually did work in Old Mystic early on too, but that was Silas Greenman, and he moved to the Pawcatuck River, set up a shipyard there with his son, who was confusingly named Thomas. So there is a plaque there that
They built the Charles C. Phelps there.
yes, I think they did. Yeah.
Was the yard on the Stonington side or the?
No, it was
Rhode
on
Island
the
side?
westerly side.
Yeah.
Yeah, on Margin Street, western side.
Yeah, there's a Greenman Avenue there.
Bill, can you tell us a little about dredging the river, how it got deep enough to
Well, they didn't really dredge it until fairly modern times, if you want to know the truth. But the river was apparently deep enough to launch these large vessels, like from at the Greenman Yard and the Mallory Yard. I forget now. 18 feet, I think, was the controlling interest during that period. Although some people think that's too deep, but it certainly wasn't deep enough for the vessels up in Old Mystic, some of which they actually had to tie barrels to the side of the vessels and float them down to deeper water.
They had casts, they put casts, and they had drag rope also. Water with mules on the side out.
Yep, exactly.
I wasn't there.
All right. Anybody else?
Your first
Is that the same family that went on to found the auto dealerships?
They may have been some connection, but I don't think so. Yeah, no, the Lathrop. I forget now. There was, I don't know. There was some little scandal about the son of the founder was catting around with some other person, and it was a big scandal because they ran off somewhere. I hope I haven't offended anybody, but.
Was there another question back?
Your first edition started in 1784, and just tonight I picked up your second edition. What was the reason to start in 1784? Was that the first of the Mystic shipbuilders?
Well, yeah. Did everybody hear the question? Yes. It's the first vessel that we can identify that was built in Mystic about that time. And there were two vessels, the Polly and the Betsy, I think they were called. They were built for owners up in Norwich. And the reason it starts there is because our friend Benedict Donald, when he burned New London, seems to have burned all the customs records for any earlier vessels. And so that's pretty much the reason that it started there. It's probable that there were some vessels maybe built earlier, but they just never were identified. So that's the reason. Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, the Eldridge Packer yard, what's the current occupant of that? I'm just trying to place exactly where that is in the river.
Well, it's down there on Lower Water Street. I don't know what's there now. There is a marina there now.
Rachel?
Fort Rachel, yeah,
Is it that far down?
yeah.
Okay.
So is that the same as the Packer?
Yes, you can, yeah.
It's just
We were talking about common, excuse me, common names earlier, and many people ask me if the Palmer Yard in Noank is any relation to the Palmers in Stonington Borough, namely Captain Nathaniel Brown Palmer.
Not that I'm aware of. Again, it was a very common name, so. It was common up where I live now in North Stonington, for yeah, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there was any relation there.
Any other questions? If not, one last thing. Bill, thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.
That's the souvenir book that I was talking about earlier about. the
Yeah, I
centennial.
want to buy a copy of the regular book, though, yeah.
Thanks again.
Thank you
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much.